All right, folks. Hello and welcome back to online English class. I hope you guys are doing well today. Today we're going to continue our work on OTN 3 by looking specifically at Henry David Thoreau's argument in favor of memorializing Captain John Brown as a hero. Okay, that excerpt can be found on page 737 of your text, which you should turn to in preparation for our work together today. Okay, before we get into that, let's just quickly remind ourselves of our responsibilities. First, make sure you're taking care of your daily discussion grade. Okay, second, make sure that you complete OTN 3 and submit your outline for your argument by Wednesday at 3 p.m. Some of you guys are doing more than I'm asking you consistently or less than I'm asking you consistently. I'm asking you to complete the outline that is at the end of this sort of packet of analytical prompts that offers a central claim, supporting claims, evidence, and a series of supporting claims for your central claim. We call that a line of reasoning. Okay, that would function as an outline for a synthetic argument in response to these prompts. All right, so that's what I'm asking you for, nothing more and significantly nothing less. Okay, after we complete our work on OTN 3, the other thing that you need to make sure that you're getting done if you're in the AP classes is your Unit 8 progress check. This is your last progress check, so you want to make sure that you're getting done that done by today at 3 p.m. Okay. Aside from that, contextualizing all of your work on these things is your continued work on your quarter 4 essay. All right, once we complete our work on Unit 6, which the Unit 6 test is going to be due next Tuesday at 3 p.m. All right, once we complete that work, our entire class is going to orient itself to two things. One, talking about your quarter 4 essay and preparing for success on that quarter 4 essay. And two, preparing AP students for the AP exam on May 20th. Once you submit your quarter 4 essay and take this exam, if you indeed have to take this exam, then you're done with your coursework. Okay, so things are wrapping up quickly here. All right, so in pursuit of developing a nuanced and thoughtful response to the question posed to you in OTN 3, let's go ahead and turn our attention to Henry David Thoreau's A Plea for Captain John Brown. All right, so obviously we need to start by looking at the rhetorical situation of the text. So to put it very simply, the context, okay, the C for our Shazap is just simply the contemporary day of John Brown, right? This is delivered in 1859 in Concord, Massachusetts, to an audience of just normal Americans who are thinking about, again, how John Brown should be memorialized, all right? The exigence of the speech is that basically the United States government and also abolitionist groups in the Northeast have declared that John Brown is not a good guy, okay, that he should be memorialized as an insane person, as a person that should not be emulated, okay? And the purpose of Thoreau's speech is to defy that characterization of John Brown. To argue that John Brown is indeed a hero and should be memorialized as such, okay? That he is anything but misguided, wild, and insane, but rather guided by a kind of coherent, unequivocal following of the natural law that is at the heart of all of United States society, and that natural law being that human beings are created with inalienable rights, and those rights are self-evident, and that they should not be abridged. And when they are, the governing structures that abridge them after a long train of abuses need to be altered and abolished by whatever means necessary. Thoreau honors John Brown as a warrior in that noble endeavor. Okay, so let's look at some of the specific ways that Thoreau develops this argument, okay, centered around his central claim that John Brown should be memorialized or is a great and heroic man, okay? So you can say that a number of ways, but that's essentially what Thoreau is arguing. Okay, so in the first paragraph of your excerpt, which is, again, just an excerpt from the speech, it's longer than the excerpt that you have, but in the first paragraph of the excerpt that you have, right, Thoreau begins to argue, all right, that when a government puts its force or puts its strength on the side of injustice, as ours does, to maintain slavery and kill the liberators of the slave, it reveals itself a merely brute force, or worse, a demonical force. Okay, which is to say, all right, that the government that is passing judgment on John Brown is tyrannical and unjust and unrighteous, and therefore disobedience to that government is right. Okay, disobedience to a government that denies the people under its care, i.e., the 4 million slaves that live in the United States of America, okay, the human beings that are under its jurisdiction, when it denies those human beings their basic rights, it becomes a demonical force. It becomes a kind of brute force, an inhumane force that ought to be disobeyed. John Brown did what he ought to have done. The judgment passed on him, all right, the claim that he is a traitor, the claim that he committed treason, therefore takes on a kind of ironic, inverted significance, as the government which punishes Brown reveals its own betrayal of its most foundational principles in killing a person who embodied, right, or a heroic liberator that embodied what the government was supposed to be representing, or the government was supposed to be instituting. All right. So he goes on in this paragraph here, okay, which is the 6th paragraph of your excerpt, I do believe, right, that if there was a society, a group of people, a group of private citizens that he refers to as this vigilant committee, okay, like the people who run the Underground Railroad at their own expense and also in defiance of federal laws that states in the Northeast, free states, were supposed to follow, okay, that they had committed to follow. When the government allows this vigilant committee, this group of private citizens, to go on and pursue justice and follow the most foundational principles that are supposed to govern Americans in interactions with other Americans, when the government relies on its private citizens to do that, and they do it in spite of and in the face of the laws that the government follows, then the government itself has become useless. The government itself has lost its power. This kind of government is, according to Thoreau, a kind of crazy government, right? That makes no sense logically, that is incoherent, and at worst, complicit in the tyranny. All right. Another argument that Thoreau offers in support of John Brown is he deconstructs the notion that John Brown's actions are bad because they are unpopular, because so few Americans, so few abolitionists would take up arms with Brown, and because he is in the minority in his opinion that there needs to be something done now by us, by whatever means necessary, in order to free these individuals, right? Because this opinion was in the minority, it is also, therefore, bad. This argument is very weak, first of all, given American principles. And Thoreau dispatches of it very quickly. He just simply asks rhetorical questions. Question, when were the good and the brave ever in the majority? Normally, it is normal, Thoreau seems to assert, for individuals to make peace with injustice. It is normal in human history for individuals to make peace with the ways in which the natural, self-evident, unalienable rights of man are not recognized. Our government is doing very much like the majority of human governments throughout the history, and the majority of human civilizations throughout history, the same thing. John Brown disobeyed it, and because he disobeyed it, right, he is in the minority. Just because he's in the minority doesn't make him bad, right? In fact, Thoreau sees this as something that that indicates the justice, the righteousness of Brown's actions. Okay, he thinks of it as a kind of sublime spectacle as he drifts into some sort of American romantic transcendentalist meditations on the beauty of his actions. Okay. And then Thoreau raises another really important question. All right, this is on the bottom of page 739, that final big paragraph on the bottom of page 739 of your text. So if you will turn there, okay, because I want to think about this concept in some detail, right? It was his, Thoreau says, speaking about Brown, okay, it was his particular belief or doctrine that a man has a perfect right to interfere by force. In other words, to use violence with the slaveholder. Okay, in other words, Brown believed that a man was right to stop or interfere with slaveholders violently in order to rescue the slave. Thoreau says very simply, I agree with him. Right? If there is any justified use of violence that Thoreau can think of, it is this, right? In which a citizen, an individual goes and attempts to protect and affirm the rights of another individual, right? In the face of a person, the slaveholder, who is denying a human being their inalienable rights. Okay? If there's ever been a just war, it would seem to be this kind of war waged by Captain John Brown. Okay, he goes on to say, they who are continually shocked by slavery, in other words, continually offended by the existence of slavery, have some right to be shocked by the violent death of the slaveholder. In other words, only the person who has a high enough value and an integral enough value of the value of human life, that who is continually shocked and offended by slavery, has any right to be shocked by the death of the slaveholder. Because if they're going to equivocate about the value of the life of the slave, then they might as well, in order to be consistent, equivocate about the value of the life of the slaveholder. What's the difference from a humanitarian or purely moral standpoint, right? Well, nothing. It's just cultural differences. All right, it's just social norms, but those social norms are not necessarily justified according to natural law or any higher moral ideal. Okay, and then he goes on, and that kind of individual will be more shocked by the slaveholder's life than by the slaveholder's death, because again, the existence of the slaveholder's life, is an egregious abridgment of the natural rights of the slaves that he holds. A clear kind of hypocrisy, even as he, the slaveholder, affirms the value of his own life and denies it to others. Okay? I shall not be forward to think him mistaken in his methods who quickest succeeds to liberate the slave. In other words, I'm not going to pass judgment on anyone who attempts to liberate slaves by any means, all right, so long as the slaveholder continues to hold those slaves in direct interference with or rejection of that slave's natural rights. I speak for the slave when I say that I prefer the philanthropy of John Brown, which the philanthropy, right? He's being somewhat ironic here. He's saying, I'd much prefer the humanitarian aid of John Brown, who did something now, to that philanthropy which neither shoots me, all right, give me liberty, or give me death, right? At any rate, I continuously inspired and have not done so, okay? Or I do not think it quite sane for one to spend his whole life in talking or writing about this matter unless he is continuously inspired, as Brown was, okay? So once again, Thoreau is extolling the virtues of Brown as a man who was continually inspired, continually shocked by the unrighteousness of slavery. Okay, he goes on to continue this argument about the justification of John Brown's use of violence. Okay, he says, we preserve the so-called peace of our community by deeds of small violence, petty violence, every day. Look at the policeman's billy and handcuffs. Okay, the billy club. All right, so modern day would be, look at the cop's handgun. Right. Why does a cop carry a gun? Okay, well, to protect himself, yeah, uh, while enforcing the law. Well, what would justify his use of those violent measures to enforce the law and defend himself from a criminal? Obviously, the moral justification that he is keeping the peace and serving the public. Okay, the policeman, is justified in his use of deadly force if indeed that use of deadly force was used to neutralize a threat to the peace of one's community. Okay, we understand that justification of violence, plain and simple. It's very obvious. The policeman isn't tried for murder, okay, unless, of course, he has exerted deadly force in a way that was unjustified, right? Okay, look at the jail. Another kind of violent abridgment of an individual criminal's right to freedom, okay, or right to walk about where they please, right? That's a kind of violent abridgment of personal freedom. Look at the gallows, right? Look at the electric chair. Okay, look at the lethal injection. We use violence to keep the peace. Look at the chaplain of the regiment. Okay, right? Look at again. This is a great example here. The chaplain here is this. It is implicit in the relationship between the chaplain and the regiment. The fact that regiments have chaplains, that the regiment has a kind of connection to a moral justification, right? That the regiment is godly, right? So we are hoping only to live safely on the outskirts of this provisional army. So we defend ourselves and our hen roost and maintain slavery. I know that the mass of my countrymen think that the only righteous use that can be made of Sharps rifles and revolvers, okay, just guns, all right? It's kind of an ironic allusion to a famous captain in a war from the early 1800s, but don't worry about it. It just means guns. Is to fight duels with them, he's being ironic, when we are insulted by other nations, or hunt Indians, or shoot fugitive slaves with them, or the like. And then he says, I think for once that when Brown used rifles and revolvers, the way that he used rifles and revolvers, they were finally employed in a righteous cause. The tools were in the hands of one who could use them righteously or rightly. Okay, so this argument right here is near and dear to the kind of thought that you need to be thinking through as you develop your own independent memorialization of John Brown, your judgment of John Brown and how he ought to be memorialized. And it comes down to, right, the fact that, right, were his violent actions, which they were indeed violent, they led to people dying. All right, he hurt people, and people that followed him lost their lives. All right, does the fact that his actions were violent undermine, okay, his commitment to a very clearly and unequivocally American observation of natural law, that human beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights? Okay, was his use of deadly force, was his use of violence justified? Okay, and if so, why? And if not, what distinguishes Brown, the man, from the policeman? What distinguishes Brown, the man, from the regiment? What is the difference between freedom fighter Captain John Brown, okay, and the great emancipator Abraham Lincoln? Where does one draw the line between the president who declares war that leads to the deaths of hundreds of thousands and the man who declares a kind of personal war at Harper's Ferry that leads to the shedding of human blood? Okay. What's the difference if there is one? All right. So again, you want to think through Thoreau's arguments. You want to think about the nature of disobedience. All right. What does it mean to follow uh, natural law in a society that does not do so perfectly? Okay. Uh, a contemporary example. Okay. The last thing that I'll say before I go. Okay. Uh, very similarly, or very similar to Brown's belief about the inherent wickedness of slavery, that what was a clear offense against the natural rights of slaves, that was a clear offense against their right to life, their most basic rights. Okay, an issue of life or death for many slaves, indeed. Okay, um, what's the difference between my personal belief that something legal in America today, and also normal in American society today, like abortion, right, which I view as a fundamental denial of a human creature, okay, a fetus, one who cannot necessarily speak for themselves or act for themselves, okay, but is no less a human creature, any less human than a person who later in their adulthood has a tragic accident and becomes incapacitated in some way. All right, or less cognitively aware, or less physically independent. In that same way, I view abortion, aborting or terminating a pregnancy, as an abridgment of that individual human creature's rights to life. Okay. Yet, it's legal in America. So, by Thoreau's reasoning, do I have a right to go and blow up an abortion clinic like individuals have done in American history, and also, by the way, been deemed enemies of society because of it, right? No one's lauding them as heroes. Why wouldn't I do that? Is it just a lack of courage, or perhaps integrity, or perhaps um, conviction? Or is there some other good reason to stop an individual from doing that? Okay, just something that you would want to think about, a sort of parallel circumstance. Okay, this essay is obviously not about abortion and whether or not you should blow up an abortion clinic, which you shouldn't. Okay, let me go on record saying that. But similar to John Brown's situation, it comes down to the ways in which we attempt to pursue a just society. All right, think about it. Have an excellent day.